Hello, beloveds, and welcome back to another episode of Why Is That? Happy New Year! I would have said that to you last week, but I didn't read my emails, so I did not know the studio was not available to record in. I can just imagine the station managers are listening to this and rolling their eyes. But it was good to have the time off, get in touch with my inner laziness. You know who else is lazy? The mainstream media. Usually I don't watch the news, but when I have seen a number of reports which are just basically rather unsubstantiated or completely false. So in this episode we will be covering fake news. I'll be doing this by playing clips by 4 YouTubers, 2 left-wing ones and 2 right-wing ones. These include Rocking MrE, Sargon of Akkad aka Carl Benjamin, H.A. Goodman, who is a reporter, and Computing Forever. That's a YouTube name, obviously. First up is Sargon of Akkad about WikiLeaks.
So the final thing I'm going to talk about is the quote-unquote evidence of Russian hacking of the DNC's emails. We went through the CIA's report in detail on a hangout last night that I did on my other channel, my live stream channel. And I'll leave a link to that in the description, so if you'd like to see this in detail, you can see why I'm saying what I'm saying now. But there are basically 3 points that you can take away from this that are incontrovertibly true. The first one is that no proof has been provided. The CIA claim that they have high confidence that this is true, which is exactly the same thing that they said prior to the Iraq War, and they refuse outright to provide any evidence to show that this is the case. And point 2, the claim has originated from the CIA. It hasn't come from anywhere else. It's an anonymous source from the CIA who has said this, and they will not give us the evidence. Basically, the CIA are asking you to take them at their word, which is something I frankly will never do, because I have read about the CIA and I simply do not trust them. And then we come to the third point, which is the weasel words, the way that this is being presented in the press. Other intelligence agencies confirm a campaign of influence took place, but not that Russian hackers are responsible. And the way that the press is portraying this in a very lazy, reductionist way is that other agencies agree that the Russians hacked the DNC. This is not what they're saying, but this is how the press is misrepresenting it. And again, I strongly advise that you take a look at the live stream or even go through the thing yourself to see. It's a 13-page document, only 5 pages of which are actually dedicated to establishing that the Russians did it. And that's done on the basis that they say, we think the Russians did it. There is a concerted effort to try and conflate the idea of Russian propaganda also being the same as Russian hacking. This campaign of influence is based on Russia Today, the Russian state media outlet, and paid Russian trolls on the internet who are paid to put pro-Russian propaganda out onto message boards and whatnot. Now, these things are not illegal, they are not hacking, and they are exactly the same as what the Hillary Clinton campaign did. So there is absolutely no grounds on which to say what they did was wrong, unless you're also going to say what Hillary did was wrong. And even then, I don't think it is. Everyone is entitled to put out whatever propaganda they want, whatever kind of worldview they want people to agree with. Everyone is entitled to do this. This is insidious, this attempt to conflate the Russians voicing their opinion as being an illegitimate means of influencing the election. Well, I'm sorry, I do recall Barack Obama coming over to Britain and saying something like, oh, what was it? Brexit's a bad idea. You should stay in the EU. If Britain leaves the EU, they will be back of the queue. You fucking hypocrites. But not only that, a CNN commentator accused Julian Assange of being a paedophile, which WikiLeaks are, of course, threatening to sue them over if they don't retract the statement, which, of course, they did. I mean, this guy actually called him, and he said this as if it was nothing, a paedophile who lives in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. By Wednesday, CNN had removed clips of Mudd's comments from the show's Twitter account and tweeted a correction. An analyst on our air earlier today asserted that Julian Assange was a paedophile and regrets saying it. In fact, CNN has no evidence to support that assertion. We regret the error. Well, I fucking bet you do. Honestly, this goddamn fake news epidemic that is coming from the mainstream media is intolerable. At every turn they're being outed as liars, and they just won't stop lying. I just can't understand it. Just tell the truth. Tell the fucking truth.
Now, with the narrative in America about Russian hacking, there was a big search for evidence of further hacking. And there was a story that came out about how the Russian government had hacked the US electrical grid, which progressive journalist H.A. Goodman will have a rant about.
My name is H.A. Goodman, and I'm an author, columnist, and journalist. And to read my writing and to see my latest CNN appearances and my MSNBC and RT appearances, you can go to hagoodman.com. I'll be coming out with a very new publication that everybody's going to love, whether you're liberal, progressive, independent, conservative. There's something there for everybody. About a year and a half ago, the Washington Post, one of the reporters for the Washington Post, emailed me and reached out to me. And they wanted to find out, they wanted to talk to me about my writing pertaining to Bernie Sanders and the articles that I was writing in the Huffington Post that were going viral. And I didn't write back because I knew I had this feeling. This is before the election, before Bernie was cheated, before everything. But I had this feeling that anybody who was associated with the establishment, whether it was the Daily Beast, who also reached out to me, I didn't want to talk to any of them because I knew they would misquote me. I knew the Washington Post would, and I knew the Daily Beast would, and I never returned any of their calls or emails. And then the Daily Beast wrote a hit piece on me, which was absolutely ridiculous. That's an example of fake news right there. But the Washington Post, I knew, I had this feeling, and I said, you know what, I'm not gonna email this guy back, one of the reporters who contacted me, because I just knew, I had this feeling that they would try to spin it into, oh, here's this wacky guy who likes Bernie, and his articles are going viral, but we really know it's about Hillary. Hillary Clinton lost miserably $1.2 billion. That's a $1.2 billion loss she spent on her campaign. But now they're fabricating stories. So the Washington Post, in addition to being a public relations firm that I kind of knew they always were, now they're actually making things up. I'll read you. The Intercept is a fantastic publication. Everybody, all my subscribers, whether you're liberal or conservative, whatever, you should read The Intercept. It's awesome. I have a great deal of respect for Glenn Greenwald. Russia hysteria infects Wash Post. Again, false story about hacking U.S. electric grid. So they're making things up, the Washington Post. It's unbelievable. The article went on. This is the Russian hacking Vermont utility story that they just fabricated. But I'll read you. The article went on and on in that vein with all the standard tactics used by U.S. media for such stories, quoting anonymous national security officials, reviewing past acts of Russian treachery, and drawing the scariest possible conclusions. The question remains, are they in other systems, and what was their intent? A U.S. official said. Whenever you hear a U.S. official said, if they quote anonymous sources to justify their ridiculous story or claims, you know that they're just either making things up or misquoting somebody that they're one of their sources they're misquoting, or they're just completely making things up and fabricating things. That is part of the Washington Post's public relations spin. But I'll read you. And it's meaningless because it's just hearsay or gossip. It's essentially becomes the Inquirer. So the Washington Post becomes a tabloid when it does that, and it always does that. It always says anonymous sources, U.S. security officials. So whenever you hear that or read that anywhere, you know most of the time it's baloney. But what was the problem with the Russian hacker story? What's the problem here? It did not happen. There was no, quote, penetration of the U.S. electricity grid. The truth was undramatic and banal. Burlington Electric, after receiving a Homeland Security notice sent to all U.S. utility companies about the malware code found in the DNC system, searched all its computers and found the code in a single laptop that was not connected to the electric grid. Searched all its computers and found the code in a single laptop that was not connected to the electric grid. The big bear, the big bad Russian bear, apparently found its way into a laptop that wasn't connected to the electric grid. And the Washington Post lost their mind. And they quoted anonymous officials. And they had to retract their story. And because of the internet, they weren't able to get away with it. People knew right away that they published a fake news story, and they're full of crap. Apparently, the Post did not even bother to contact the company before running its wild sensationalistic claims. So they just go ahead and publish whatever they want without any type of journalistic, without any ethical consideration as to whether or not it's true, what kind of impact it'll have. So Burlington Electric had to issue its own statement to the Burlington Free Press, which debunked the Post's central claim, emphasis in original, quote, "We detected the malware in a single Burlington Electric Department laptop not connected to our organization's grid systems." The Washington Post is now making things up. It's bad enough that they didn't focus on Clinton Foundation scandals and they only focused on the Trump Foundation, which is fine with me. You want to go ahead and investigate the Trump Foundation, go ahead. Or Trump's charities, whatever. I'm cool either way. You find foul play or criminal behavior, great. But if you don't focus on the AP's report, $156 million given to the Clinton Foundation from 85 donors who just happened to meet Hillary Clinton. It was a coincidence. Or 3 FBI field offices that wanted to investigate the Clinton Foundation. That's part of CNN. Or the International Business Times breaking the weapons deal scandal, which the Washington Post covered as well, to an extent. You don't focus on those things. You do everything possible to say, oh yeah, it's normal. Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton met on the tarmac. It was just normal. They talked about Brexit, grandchildren, and golf. That's real news to the Washington Post. The fact that right now they're actually fabricating stories, making things up. It's beyond fake news. It's just beyond fake news. Now it's complete propaganda spin, and they're basically working for Clinton's campaign, and they're basically working for President Obama. So they're really a state-run publication at this point.
Of course, not wanting to be left out, Facebook has jumped on the bandwagon regarding fake news, especially after a lot of Hillary supporters blamed Mark Zuckerberg for Facebook playing a role in the victory of Donald Trump. Now, this will be covered by Dave Cullen, who you can look up on YouTube on the channel Computing Forever.
Fakebook has decided enough's enough. You can't have a well-informed citizenry. You have to keep the spread of information controlled, contained, and ensure that reality is rejected and replaced by spin, bias, and leftist narrative. So, Facebook has just become even more useless than it was before, if you can imagine such a thing. They're now partnering with Snopes and PolitiFact, sites with a known liberal slant, to fact-check all viral news posts shared on the social network. In other words, to silence the hell out of conservative voices. So what's going to happen exactly? From one of the sites they're attempting to bury as fake news, Breitbart, stories deemed to be false will now be flagged by Facebook with an accompanying red label claiming the story is disputed by third-party fact-checkers. In other words, we don't like it, it's inconvenient, bury it. Users will then have the option to learn why this is disputed, to receive an explanation as to why Facebook believes the story is false. Well, that should be obvious. They disagree with it. We'll use the reports from our community, along with other signals, to send stories to these organizations, Facebook VP Adam Mosseri wrote in the Facebook news blog. If the fact-checking organizations identify a story as fake, it will be flagged as disputed, and there will be a link to the corresponding article explaining why. Mosseri insists that the company will not prohibit users from posting anything deemed fake, but you will see a warning that the story has been disputed as you share. Furthermore, Facebook will prohibit paid promotion stories that have been marked as disputed. The Ministry of Truth, folks. Business Insider reports that these organizations will include the likes of Snopes, ABC, PolitiFact, and FactCheck.org. All of these sites, of course, have a history of left-wing partisanship, particularly throughout the 2016 election. For example, PolitiFact infamously said that it was mostly false when Donald Trump claimed in a presidential debate that Hillary Clinton wanted open borders. What do you mean by mostly false? PolitiFact made this ruling despite Hillary Clinton being on record as saying, "My dream is a hemispheric common market with open trade and open borders." The statement wasn't mostly false. It wasn't false. It was true. Trump also said that Russia has 1,800 nuclear warheads and has expanded its arsenal while the US hasn't. PolitiFact admitted that Trump's claim was factual. Well, that's the end of the story, but apparently it's not. But it rated the statement as half true. Oh, God. For supposedly missing the big picture. Okay. In both of these cases, PolitiFact went beyond mere fact-checking and moved the goalposts in ways that benefited Clinton's candidacy. This type of ideological fact-checking went beyond parody during October's presidential debates, with NBC taking Trump's statement that Clinton acid-washed her emails, a reference to the data deletion tool BleachBit. They took this 100% literally and declared the statement false. Pathetic. Now, in conclusion, Facebook is about to become a news service at this point, dispensing leftist-approved lies, biased reporting, burying the truth from its news feed, preventing its users from sharing independent news content, and of course, manipulating what its users see and consume. Political activists and left-wing ideologues and globalists are now in charge of media dissemination on a major social network with in excess of 1.79 billion monthly active users. The war on the minds of the people has just begun. If you want the truth, it lies with websites like Minds.com and Gab.ai. The more the big social mainstream sites begin to double down on their censorship and thought policing, the more they usher in their own demise. The genie is out of the bottle, the truth is bursting through the concrete, and you can add layer upon layer of deceit and spin all you want. You can lacquer the propaganda on heavy. But at the end of the day, too many folks are red-pilled. And to the establishment I say, you never saw Hillary's defeat coming. You believed all you had to do was name-call and smear and manipulate the news narrative to push your agenda. You failed. And you'll fail yet again. People don't need Facebook in their lives, and there are fairer and better alternatives. The sad reality here is that what's going to happen is a serious division online very soon. The internet is about to be split in two. Echo chambers on both sides are now forming as users choose to engage only with their preferred websites, forums, and social networks that support their viewpoints. This is unfortunate, but it's happening because of the mainstream media and political establishment. It's happening because of the rise in left-wing-led censorship. We didn't ask for this. We were happy to play fair and engage in dialogue and open debate with you. You weren't. And as a consequence of your breathtaking defeats of late, you've shit the bed, thrown a hissy fit, thrown your toys out of the stroller, and now we have to get the hell away from you. Mark Zuckerberg, you could have learned from the mistakes of your counterpart over on Twitter, Jack Dorsey. This move is going to begin the demise of Facebook, and there won't be any coming back. Watch your share price plummet just like Twitter's did after it handed control of the site over to its Trust and Safety Council and began censoring conservatives. You can slow us down, but you can't stop us. Your lies and deception will become bleedingly obvious. And then, of course, when even the most dyed-in-the-wool liberal users begin to realize just how self-serving and outrageously intolerant your website has become, they too will be red-pilled. Your own user base will begin to turn on you at that point. You cannot have democracy if the truth is hidden from view. Real journalism must be allowed to flourish. Crush the liberty and freedom of the people, and you can expect a mass exodus.
I totally agree with Dave Cullen's ending there about how this issue of fake news is linked to democracy, as it only sprung up in the wake of the American election. And this aspect will be covered by our last clip, done by Rocking MrE. That's Mr. E. That sounds like mystery. It's a sign of great intelligence on his behalf. He has a philosophy YouTube channel.
2016 was a terrible year for the left, globalism, or whatever ideological label you give to the establishment that likes to hide its authoritarian agenda behind lies and deception. First, Brexit dealt a crushing blow to the long march through history that the establishment believes to be inevitable, and then Trump dealt another crushing blow during the US election. On the day after the US election, along with my rendition of Star Spangled Banner, I made some predictions about what would happen in the days that followed the election of Trump. Like my prediction that Trump would become the next US president, they've come true. The establishment has endlessly doubled down, desperately attempting to overturn the democratic will of the people, just like the attempt to undermine and water down Brexit. By far the biggest example of this is the fake news narrative that is now being used to destroy free speech. In this video, I will explain what the real fake news is and the consequences we are experiencing as a result of this narrative. Anyone believing that, upon losing, the left would go quietly and honourably into the night doesn't understand their psychology. Not only does the left never sleep, but they will do anything to achieve their objectives, partly out of a belief that the end justifies the means, and partly because evil sees objective morality as a weakness to be taken advantage of, rather than a virtue. While 2016 was certainly a very successful year for those opposed to globalism, it's going to take many years to turn this agenda around and make any changes that are noticeable in society. Until then, Trump's election and Brexit are only the beginning of a very long fight. The left has had many decades to carry out its long march through the institutions of society, now controlling practically all of them, even the majority of religious institutions. Hence the reason that there's basically no mainstream narrative that doesn't parrot the agenda of globalism. Even with a Trump and Brexit victory, the left still controls society. It will take around 2 decades to end this control because a whole new generation of people need to be educated. As for the current population, a significant proportion are a lost cause because they've been so deeply indoctrinated. Some leftists will wake up when they are ready, but most can't or won't. This brief description of where we now find ourselves explains why the establishment was able to very quickly regroup after a Trump and Brexit victory. Although the left lost, all the power they have is still intact, allowing them to immediately go on the counter-attack. It's utter folly to expect the left to reflect on a loss in any meaningful way. The narcissistic left will never admit they are wrong and always look for others to blame, as they've repeatedly shown throughout history. They will also do anything to regain control. Following both the Brexit and Trump victories, we first saw a rise in false reporting of hate crimes, none of which led to any actual convictions, and all of which were spread by mainstream media sensationalism. These were propagated by professional left-wing activists and agitators funded by usual suspects like George Soros. This is the first example of the real fake news that the left would soon begin to project onto its opponents. As well as this false reporting, the establishment would then begin parroting the talking point that the Brexit and Trump victories were thanks to the opposition spreading lies. Not only was this nothing but unsubstantiated defamation and slander, but the mainstream media actively tried to downplay incidents where Trump and Brexit supporters were harassed, attacked and beaten. One example being the terrible excuse for a media site, Snopes, suggesting that the brutal beating of Trump supporter David Wilcox stemmed from a traffic altercation, not politics, despite the fact video evidence proves that people targeted him for being a Trump supporter. The real fake news consistently comes from the left, who see the media as indoctrination rather than information. There are basically no credible mainstream media outlets or left-wing journalists to speak of, certainly none that can rival the work of Breitbart or Infowars that's labelled fake news by the mainstream media. Hacks try to portray the likes of the BBC, New York Times and Washington Post as real news, despite being the worst offenders of fake news propaganda. In general, all the mainstream media does is conform to an ideological narrative, with no concern for facts or objectivity. One example of this is mainstream media election polls. I've previously expressed my scepticism of their accuracy, and this is easy to see now that both Brexit and the election of Trump were downplayed by a flawed polling methodology. The mainstream media may have previously convinced the majority of the public that these polls are credible, but with one inaccurate prediction after another, they become nothing short of a joke. In an attempt to explain away the fake news reporting of the mainstream media, the fake news narrative became a primary talking point in the weeks after Trump's election. Not only did the establishment continue to push more fake news, but it also tried to project its own agenda onto the independent media that helped get Trump elected. This has resulted in a further rise in the type of censorship that's become the norm on sites like Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. Censorship that's resulted in my own channel being restricted in very obvious ways, such as my real-time video views being suppressed. This is a recent phenomenon and almost certainly an attempt to increase the censorship of my channel as it grows in popularity. In a display of pure irony, the aim is to make highly partisan fake news sites like Snopes, ABC and PolitiFact define what is real or fake news online, even though these entities are nothing but globalist mouthpieces that muddy the waters and lie about anything that contradicts the establishment narrative. This has resulted in growing demands to censor big names like InfoWars and Breitbart. But especially in the wake of the Podesta email leaks, this is just as much about censoring smaller online voices because they've become such a big threat to the establishment. Further real fake news took place in the months that followed the US election, with the allegation that Russia helped get Donald Trump elected. In an act of yet more projection and irony, the lying mainstream media began to claim that Russia hacked voting machines or changed the election day count, totally ignoring the fact that Project Veritas had only recently exposed Democratic Party voting fraud over many decades. Naturally, this was brushed under the carpet, even as Jill Stein received crowdfunding for a recount in 3 US states, none of which included states that the Democrats had won in, and only included states where the Republicans gained narrow victories. Despite this blatant leftist collusion between Stein and the Democrats, this did little more than give Trump an even larger margin of victory. The allegations of further alleged Russian hacking of John Podesta's emails and the DNC has amounted to a big fat goose egg, i.e. nothing. This didn't stop the mainstream media spreading the same kind of unsubstantiated lies about intelligence that led to the Iraq War, in the hope that this would be enough to convince the public that intervention was necessary. The fake news narrative is really about loss of control. Establishment lies have become so outrageous that many people don't believe them anymore. But as I've already explained, the left still has all the power in society, and this will take decades to diminish in any meaningful sense. The left never learns that you can't suppress reality indefinitely. Yes, you can do this for a time and even call this freedom, in an Orwellian act of doublethink. But as the lies and denial of reality grow, it becomes impossible to maintain this illusion. This is why totalitarianism is always the result of ideologies that go against nature, in a desperate attempt to force people to ignore their own senses. This is Rocking MrE, over and out.
I hope you enjoyed this week's show. If you want to hear more from those YouTubers, you can go check out their channels. The first one about the WikiLeaks was Sargon of Akkad. The second one was H.A. Goodman. The third one was Computing Forever. And of course, Rocking MrE, who we just heard. And I'll leave you a suggestion for if you want to check international news. If you haven't already, look on RT, which formerly Russia Today, especially the show they have on at Crosstalk with a lot of good intellectual debate. Oh, and the Kaiser Report for financial news.